Hello and welcome to this lecture for BSAD 525. We're going to be looking at global strategies and the multinational corporation in this lecture. So a few things that we're going to cover: the implications of international competition for your industry analysis. Think five forces and what international competition does to those dynamics. We're going to look at what competitive advantage looks like within an international context. Internationalization decisions related to where to locate production, and then the other side of that, where to locate or how to enter a foreign market, kind of the demand side and the supply side. We'll look at multinational strategies and the whole trade-off between global integration versus national differentiation. And then we'll look a little bit at how to implement international strategy. So some of the implications. Essentially, we have industries where international trade is more likely. Now, the main upshot is that if your industry is one in which you will face international competition, that increases the competition. So if we think about competitive rivalry, threat of new entrants, and even possibility of substitutes, there's just more players. The flip side of that, though, is that there may also be more customers and options for suppliers. So really, there's a potential impact on each aspect of the five forces, and how that plays out and what the overall difference is really is specific to your industry and the extent to which it actually is internationalized or not. This chart here essentially looks at and categorizes industry type and how internationalized they are, based on your x-axis there, the extent to which that industry experiences foreign direct investment, and on the y-axis, which is maybe the one we should have started with, the extent to which that industry actually engages in foreign trade. An industry might engage in more or less foreign trade, but that doesn't determine whether or not there is foreign direct investment actually made. If we start in our, what would that be, the third quadrant, so sheltered industries, we think of things that just are not traded internationally, and as such there isn't any foreign direct investment made. Taxi services, that is something that you get done locally. You can't export a taxi ride. You need it. It is dependent on location and being local. Same thing with dry cleaning. You don't send away your dry cleaning to France to get cleaned. Firms in France don't make foreign direct investment generally to do dry cleaning in the USA for reasons we'll look at. Hairdressing, same thing. You can't buy a haircut online from overseas. Fresh milk obviously doesn't get exported for the simple reason that it is perishable, and that goes for lots of different food products. When we move, let's say, to our second quadrant, trading industries, these are things that are sold internationally. There's a high degree of international trade in these industries, but it's not done through FDI. And we'll look fully at different, what we call entry modes of foreign trade and internationalization, but at either extreme, I'm always struggling with my mirror image camera here. Which hand is this? Okay. On this side, we'd have exports, pure exports, no foreign direct investment. On this side, we have pure foreign direct investment, where we open up a subsidiary of the firm, wholly owned, in a host market. I'm going to be using these two terms a fair bit. Let's see if this will actually write. For some reason, PowerPoint on my work computer just doesn't like me marking up the slides, so I'm sorry. But we talk about the home market, which is where we're from as a firm, and the host market is the country, the foreign country or foreign market we're looking to enter. Trading industries that tend to enter via pure export, shipbuilding, military hardware, diamond mining, agriculture, these are all trading industries. These are things that we don't make foreign direct investment. When we make foreign direct investment, we're opening up, we're employing staff in a host market, a foreign host market. If we don't do that, we don't have to do that for some of these. We can just ship them off. If I was to start selling, I don't know, little bracelets from an Etsy shop in Thibodeau, and somebody wanted to buy them in Germany, well, the first way I'd sell in Germany would probably just be to post them directly through United Postal Service or FedEx or whoever. That would be exporting. If I decided to actually start employing people in Germany to make the bracelets or distribute them, then I'd be making foreign direct investment. Shipbuilding. Well, why does shipbuilding tend to just ship or export rather than make foreign direct investment? Well, a couple of reasons. Economies of scale are very important. It's very capital intensive, so it doesn't make sense to spread out your manufacturing around the world if you don't have to. And by definition, if you're building a ship, it's easy to ship. As soon as you're on tide water, I'm just going to move this over a bit here. As soon as you're on tide water, transportation becomes very, very cheap. It's the cheapest way to transport anything is via boats. Part of that is because of standardized containers, etc. But if you build a ship, very high cost, capital intensive, and once you've made it, well, it ships over, it drives over to wherever it's going. Military hardware, we tend to export. The US sells F-35s to Israel, it sells missiles to Ukraine, but it's not going to make those missiles or those F-35s in the host market. Why not? Because they don't want their military secrets being stolen. We'll sell you the missiles, we won't tell you how to make them, and we're not going to make them in your country because we don't want you to strategically steal that intelligence. Diamond mining. Well, why are diamonds exported? Well, you can't just decide that you're going to open up a diamond mine in any country. The diamonds are where they are, as God has distributed them in nature, and where they are is where we get them from, and where whoever wants to buy them, we're going to have to ship them to that seller. Agriculture, exact same thing. Where the crops grow is where they grow, and so we tend not to see export there. We tend not to see FDI, and we do export. Looking now at our fourth quadrant, multi-domestic industries. These are industries where there's a low degree of trade, but when it does happen, it is through foreign direct investment. Frozen foods, retail banking, hotels, wireless telephone. Retail banking's more obvious. It's a personalized service, so if you're going to expand internationally as a bank, you're going to need to have branches in the host market. Hotels, same, even more so, right? How can somebody sleep on the bed if the bed is in America and the customer's in France? You're going to have to buy some hotels there. Wireless telephones, again, we're going to have physical assets literally in the ground, cell towers, probably some, not necessarily, I guess, having customer service personnel there, because we could offshore outsource that to India or wherever. Frozen foods, I'm trying to think of why we wouldn't export this. I guess you'd have to have I guess the idea is maybe you'd have foreign direct investment in terms of frozen warehouses, but I think you could still outsource that or rent the warehouse space. Global industries. These are industries where you get both export and FDI, and really which one is dependent on the firm and its specific contexts, which we'll look at in a minute here later on in the lecture when we look at Dunning's OLI model, but it explains stuff that isn't really explained by just looking at this graph. Automobiles, sometimes those are just purely exported. Sometimes a firm will open up a manufacturing facility in the host market, like oftentimes because of tariffs, to be honest. Oil and gas, sometimes it's exported. Sometimes, again, you'll have FDI, either because that's an American firm is trying to exploit reserves in another country, or they need to distribute. Semiconductors, again, you see a mix. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company does both export from Taiwan, but they also have a few fabs around the world. Alcoholic beverages, similarly, you do see, for example, sort of local bottlers and distributors, like a big company like Anheuser-Busch. I don't know this for a fact, but it wouldn't be uncommon for someone like them to have local breweries in host markets. One of the reasons being the food is it's perishable, and there are brand advantages, etc. What does internationalization do to profitability, competition, and structure? Well, all things being equal, which they often aren't, but if we hold everything else constant, international competition increases firm rivalry in Porter's 5 forces, which is going to reduce profit and returns on capital. Competition, well, it increases that. Industry structure, it lowers the entry barriers in national markets. That's not quite accurate. It's not that it lowers them, but there are just more firms. I mean, the entry barriers probably stay constant. If it's a high capital intensive industry, it's not going to get less capital intensive, but there are more firms that may be well enough resourced to enter our industry. Lower seller concentration, which gives our buyers better power, right? If now there's more sellers, if we have international competition, and if we hold buyers constant in the same market, again, which we might not do, but if we do, that's going to give the buyers more bargaining power, greater diversity of competitors, so it's more likely that we may lose a position that we're holding or have to compete for a position that we maybe had to ourselves previously. And the summary there is just increases buyer power. How does it affect our basic framework of strategy? The basic framework is those 3 boxes at the top. We do a rigorous analysis of the firm, its resources and capabilities. We do a rigorous analysis of the external environment, right? Internal, the firm; external, the industry. And then our strategy, to the extent that our strategy connects our resources to our opportunities and threats, or our strengths and weaknesses, if we're going to think in terms of SWOT, to our opportunities and threats in the external environment. To the extent we do that well, we have strategic fit and competitive advantage. When we add internationalization to that, well, now we're just doing this in more places, with possibly different contexts for each of for the industry environment. We have multiple industry environments now, where the industry environment we have changes to have more competitors, increased buyer power, etc. The theory of comparative advantage. I'll post a video about this. It's not essential for strategy, really. It's an economics concept that explains the fact that and explains why international trade is beneficial, and it's sort of the fundamental argument from Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. If a firm focuses on doing those things that it is best at, or sorry, a country, it's meant to apply to countries, not firms. That's really important. If a country focuses on those products that it is best at, and let someone else produce the things it's less good at, everybody gets richer. I'll post a video from a Nichols alumni, actually. A guy called Don Boudreau has a really good video on this, where he talks about someone fishes and someone else gathers bananas. But essentially, if you think about it this way, if you were a dentist running a dental practice where you could bill $500 an hour or whatever it is they bill, it wouldn't make sense for you to answer phones, because that's low value add activity. There's an opportunity cost. An opportunity cost is key to this idea of comparative advantage, in the sense that you're now answering a phone when you could be doing $500 an hour work. You're losing that value that you could have, the time you could have spent doing dental work, because you're answering a phone. So what do? You hire someone who can't do dental work to answer phones, where for that person, your receptionist, it's the best use of their time, and you as a dentist focus on what's the best use of your time, and you're both better off for it. We've got some examples here. Philippines is relatively more efficient in the production of footwear, apparel, assembled electronic products, but less efficient in chemicals and automobiles. The US is more efficient in the production of semiconductors and pharmaceuticals than shoes and shirts. One of the reasons that tariffs reduce wealth is because they allocate resources to less efficient purposes. So if we start making shoes in the USA because of tariffs, there's an opportunity cost. Those resources could have been put towards a better use. Well, what's that better use? Well, it's whatever somebody would have paid them to do in the absence of those tariffs being there. Tariffs, by definition, create market inefficiencies for political purposes that may be tied to certain values and objectives, but they do reduce overall wealth of a country. Which is, again, the fundamental argument in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, and something that is very, very well evidenced empirically. Here's some examples of comparative advantage across different products for different countries. I'll leave you guys to look at this, but the US has a large comparative advantage in cereals, of all things, although India even more so. The US has some great comparative advantages in higher tech products, pharmaceuticals. Aerospace is a huge one. Optical, medical, and scientific equipment. And so that's what you would expect the US to produce more of in a free trade regime. Porter's competitive advantage of nations is something different. Comparative advantage explains why free trade allocates resources, a country's resources, the most efficiently and increases international wealth, including for the countries who participate. Porter's competitive advantage is trying to answer the question, what makes a nation particularly good in a certain industry? And so you could say this feeds into how the comparative advantage arises, I suppose, if you wanted to tie these two concepts together. But Porter's looking at industries specifically and what features of the home country creates competitive industries. Why are the Germans so good at making cars? Why is the US so good at pharmaceutical research? And so he proposes what is called the National Diamond Framework that has 4 drivers. The first one is factor conditions, natural resource endowments. And that includes human resource endowments. If you have a highly educated workforce, that's a home factor condition. If you happen to have lots of rare earth minerals, that's a home factor condition. Happen to have highly accessible and easily refined oil deposits, all factor conditions. A developed finance market is a huge home factor condition, although you could also argue, I suppose, that that's a supporting industry. Actually, it probably is a supporting industry, so I'll leave that for our second one here. Related and supporting industries. Key role of industry structure, industry clusters. What you find, and I'll post a video on this as well, is that oftentimes there's a benefit to being located in an industry structure, a cluster. For example, the computing software industry, right? We've all heard of Silicon Valley in Northern California. Well, what is there? What's part of that cluster? Well, you have Stanford University that produces a lot of very capable graduates, computer science graduates. MIT does as well in Boston. You have in Silicon Valley, you have lots of a huge developed venture capital industry. Other firms, so that there's exchange of ideas between firms and employees of those firms. Those all support a more robust and competitive industry. Demand conditions, it's often very helpful, although in the age of globalization, fast transportation, cheap transportation, and internet communication, it's less important, but home demand conditions still drive the competitiveness of an industry. It's hard to start a good car company in a country where nobody can afford a car or nobody drives a car. The more demand you have at home, the more competitive you'll be in that industry. Strategy, structure, and rivalry. Essentially, and this is counterintuitive perhaps to Porter's 5 forces, but if you want to have a competitive industry, you want more, not less competition. In Russia, which had completely closed off economy, there was no competition really. You had the state car factory, and because there was no competition, there was no upgrading. Firms weren't trying to get better and more efficient at doing what they did, so Russia did not have, and still does not have, a competitive automobile industry. How do we apply this? The idea here is that we adapt our strategy based on the resource conditions. So if a US company wanted to get into textile manufacturing, they'd have to do something different because they're not going to compete with the labor costs, for example, of India or Bangladesh. In the semiconductor industry, for that reason, the US firms focus on design, right? NVIDIA doesn't manufacture chips, they design them and let someone else do the manufacturing. Same, Intel has been trying to do manufacturing and failing, and that's actually a big part of what's put them behind AMD recently. And how do we do this? Well, we can have globally dispersed value chains. Locate those value chain activities in the countries that have a competitive industry for them. So how do we decide where to locate production? Well, we'll think of the national resource conditions. What are the major resources that we need for this product? Where can we get these at the lowest cost? Kind of obviously. If it's manufacturing or very labor intensive like textiles, which textiles are still very low levels of automation, if we're Nike, for example, well, we'll do the manufacturing in India, Vietnam, Bangladesh, where labor's cheap, and there are skilled textile workers. To what extent is our competitive advantage based on this, and are they transferable? You don't outsource whatever is the source of your competitive advantage. So Nike isn't going to outsource its marketing to another country or to another firm in another country, because that's the whole way it creates and captures value. Apple's not going to outsource its marketing and research and design. That's its core competence, if you want to look at it that way, or its firm-specific advantage. Tradability issues as well. Can the product be transported at economic cost? Are there any trade restrictions? Cars can be or can they be transported cost efficiently? Cars can be transported cost efficiently. However, there's trade restrictions. That's why Hyundai is opening up factories in the US. If it's something like cement or something that's very heavy relative to its price, well, you're not going to spend $500 to ship $100 worth of cement. So you're going to open up a location next to your customer. Here's some stats on the cost of manufacturing. Switzerland has the highest hourly wage rate as of 2012. They're not going to be making t-shirts in Switzerland because nobody would be willing to pay for the labor that would go into them. Here's some comparison of comparative advantage in certain textiles. I won't go into this in detail, but certainly worth having a look at. Here's a chart just showing how widely dispersed Apple's value chain is for the iPhone. You guys have done the Apple case perhaps. One of the things Tim Cook really made his name with at Apple, and the reason he's now CEO, is because he was the one who optimized their value chain. He got their costs as efficient really as possible and did that through all sorts of complex outsourcing. And as you can see here, all the different parts come from all over the world from all different companies. With Apple actually doing almost nothing except designing the chips and designing the products themselves. So here's what you might call a decision process chart for deciding where to locate an activity. This is something you might want to think about with your strategic recommendations. All things being equal, where would be the best place to locate the activity? What's the lowest cost country of production? Are there any government incentives or penalties, tariffs, perhaps, that make us want to locate something abroad next to our customers, or FDI incentives, favorable tax positions that are offered for companies to invest, right? Trump is offering a lot of, well, both a carrot and a stick, I suppose, tariffs to make export from foreign companies less attractive, or importing by its customers in the US less attractive, but also encouragement to invest in the USA. What internal resources and capabilities does the firm possess in particular locations? So for example, a firm like, well, what's a good example here? Some firms will have resources and capabilities specific to subsidiaries. A firm, so Dyson has a head office. Dyson is a British company, but they have a head office in Singapore where they do a lot of R&D. So they've chosen to locate it there because of factors related to Porter's National Diamond Framework. But then the other considerations relate to the importance of the links, the importance of the links and the fit of those activities with the firm's other activities. Are we trying to be differentiated? If we're trying to achieve differentiation, well, then we're not going to just locate manufacturing necessarily wherever it's cheapest. We want to achieve a certain level of quality. Apple could get cheaper labor in, let's say, I don't know, Cambodia than it could from Taiwan, but Taiwan will give it better quality than Cambodia for its manufacturing contracts, which it has with Foxconn. And do we need to co-locate activities? There are sometimes coordination benefits. It's often beneficial to locate R&D near your marketing team, for example, so that there can be feedback between new innovations and in R&D or new inventions and your people who are actually looking at new products in the marketing team. So it might make sense to have both of them in the same location. Apple has those two activities both located in the US so that you can get coordination between marketing and R&D. Here's another example, but this time more visual, looking at all the different places that the parts are made for a Boeing 787. Looking now at different modes of entry. On the left, we have the least resource commitment to the right side where we have the highest commitment. Starting on the left, we have spot sales. That's sort of a one-and-done transaction. Like when you go to the store and buy a loaf of bread, that's a spot sale. You pay the price, you take the good home. There are some legal protections. If the bread was bad, you could go back and get customer service to fix it, but it's a spot sale. Buying a stock is very much a spot sale, right? Like there's no refunds if the stock decreases in price. That's a pure exporting strategy. Long-term contracting, perhaps you make an agreement to buy a certain amount of products or sell a certain amount of products, I guess if you're exporting, to a customer in a foreign market, and they make a long-term contract to buy however many. Let's say, I don't know, if Aer Lingus in Ireland made a contract with Boeing to buy a certain amount of Boeing 737s over a number of years. That would still be exporting, but it's a more long-term relationship. You can have a foreign agent or distributor. So for example, in the music industry or musical instrument industry, Sweetwater, I think, has a agency relationship with Behringer, a synth manufacturer, music equipment manufacturer. So they would be a foreign distributor for Behringer, which I believe is a Swiss company or a German company maybe in the USA. So you have someone on contract who has an agreement to sell your products. They probably have some kind of commission or other contractual arrangement that makes it beneficial to them, but they aren't a direct employee, they're an agent. Next we move on to licensing. Two different ways to do this. Franchising, that's where you really want, usually we see this in the fast food industry, of course. So if McDonald's wants to open up a restaurant in Saudi Arabia, it doesn't go and buy a location. It finds a franchisee who pays McDonald's to use their intellectual property, their recipes, their brand, and open up at McDonald's, and they'll operate under fairly strict contractual rules. Licensing, direct licensing is another version. This tends to happen a lot in manufacturing, say of drugs, chips. So for example, NVIDIA licenses the manufacture of their graphics cards to different companies like Asus, right? If you go and look up, I don't know, whatever the most recent gaming graphics card is, like a GTX 3060 or RTX 3060, you'll see ones that are made by Asus and other companies, and they're just paying NVIDIA to use their architecture and their IP. ARM, the chip design company, that architecture, every time Apple makes an M1 silicon chip, As you saw in the Apple case, they pay a licensing fee to ARM. So pretty low resource commitment. You have a patent and you let someone use it, they pay you royalties. Great revenue generator with little commitment. Getting into direct investment now, but again, still on the lower commitment side. Joint venture. That's where your two companies create a third legal entity. It's a partnership. Is not necessarily a joint venture. It only becomes a joint venture when there is a third entity created and there's equity from both parties that own that third entity. It's lower commitment because you're theoretically sharing the ownership. So you're not taking full ownership, you're going at it with a partner who also has equity ownership. There are equity partnerships that are not joint ventures. So firms will often form a partnership and take maybe like a 5% equity stake in each other. Neither of them owns the other firm, but it aligns incentives now. If you screw the other party over, they're going to lose that equity, or it's going to damage their investment that they have in your firm. The extent, but there's a decision there even of, okay, well, how much of the firm's value chain activities do we want to have in the host country through a joint venture? Is it just going to be manufacturing? Is it just going to be distribution and sales? Or are we going to have a full value chain, a full mirror of our home country value chain in the host market? That would be fully integrated. Last, wholly owned subsidiary. Now we have a company in the host market, a legal entity that's wholly owned by the company in the home country. It's a wholly owned subsidiary. And again, there's a choice to be made of, well, how much of the value chain activities are we going to perform there? Are we Hyundai and maybe we're just going to have a manufacturing operation in Georgia? Or are we going to have more than that? Are we going to have our whole marketing team located in the US? Are we going to have a finance team, all our support activities, etc.? Are we going to make it fully integrated? We now get to a key concept in international business, what's called Gemmewatt's cage framework. This was really in response and a reaction to forecasts or predictions, say in the 90s, as the internet was booming, that distance didn't matter anymore. There was a famous book by an economist called The World is Flat, essentially saying that we're all going to converge culturally and all firms would be global because of the boom in internet communications and advances in transportation and efficiencies and cost. And Gemmewatt, in a Harvard Business Review article, said, well, no, distance still does matter. That's what his article was called. And he just said, you guys are only thinking about geographic distance, which does still matter, but what's getting left out of these predictions is the fact other dimensions of distance, cultural distance, administrative and political distance, geographic distance, which is the one we're used to, and economic distance. Cultural differences includes things like languages, religions, values, cultural values, the type of social networks, or the lack of connection between the home and host country. Something that sells well or is fashionable in America may not be as fashionable in India for women's clothing, say, or food. There's often, and it mentions it there, the industries most affected are anything with high linguistic content or cultural content. A show that is well loved in America may not be well loved in other markets. Food that is popular in South Louisiana, right? A po' boy shop or Cane's Chicken, which I love, may not be popular elsewhere. Famously, Chick-fil-A tried to come to Canada, and it wasn't very successful, to my disappointment, because I love Chick-fil-A. Same thing with Krispy Kreme donuts. Didn't last in Canada very long. Administrative and political distance, things like a shared currency can facilitate exchange. It gets rid of currency risk. Political hostility between countries that might result in things like tariffs or embargoes can create distance. There's a lot of political distance right now between the US and Russia. It's almost basically illegal to do business there for a lot of American industries. China's becoming increasingly fraught politically in its relations with the US, or just weak legal and financial institutions. American companies for years have found out that their intellectual property is often stolen when they do business in China and other countries where intellectual property protection is weak. So industries that are most affected, well, industries viewed by the government as strategically important: tech, chips, defense, even telecom. There was a ban on Huawei phones, I believe, or maybe, yeah, Huawei phones in the US because it was believed that the Chinese government was spying on Americans that way through those phones. Geographic distance we're familiar with, but it's still important. Well, we measure it in terms of lack of a common border. If we don't share a border, then we're probably more geographically distant, obviously, but also just physical remoteness. Even within the USA, it takes longer to get something from Amazon here than it does, say, when I lived in London or in a more population-dense area. When I lived in London, we had something called Amazon Now, and you could get stuff like certain items you could get within like 3 hours to your door. Right, it's harder to get IKEA furniture. I don't even know if there are any IKEAs in Louisiana, just because it's lower population density. It's more remote in a sense in terms of demographics, but also physically remote. I guess you could also think about Alaska. It takes a long time to get something there. It would be more expensive to ship. Which industries are most affected? Well, products with low value to weight. As I mentioned in another one, you're not going to ship $100 worth of cement if it costs you $500 to ship it. Things that are more perishable, food that's going to go bad in transit, or where communication is vital. Anything where you're doing deals that have a very strong time component, right? Investment banking. Well, if the stock market's in New York, well, even in Canada, I had a friend who worked in investment banking. All the Bond Street, which is our version of Wall Street, was in Toronto. If you wanted to work for an investment bank, you had to either move there, or if you were working at a local office in the West, it meant your day started at 4 a.m. when the market opened. You'd have the same thing in the US. If you're an investment banker in California doing trades, well, your day starts when the markets open in Manhattan. Economic differences, different consumer incomes, differences in resources, different information and knowledge. Basic demographic things here again. If you're selling a differentiated product and the consumers in your home market are significantly more wealthy per capita than those in the host market, that could cause a problem. When Target tried to enter Canada, Target's whole proposition was that it was low cost value. But because of the relative poverty of Canadians, unfortunately, Target was actually quite expensive in Canada, and so they exited. Just the customers just didn't have enough money for it to seem like a good value proposition. Now to our trade-offs between global integration versus national differentiation. Certain products can just treat the whole market as one big market, undifferentiated market. I don't mean differentiation in the sense of differentiation versus cost leadership. I just mean in the sense that you can sell the same product to anyone in the world without needing to customize it. They've got some examples there, right? Zippers. YKK makes zippers. There's no national preference for certain types of zippers that zip down instead of up. Honda motorcycles, they can sell the same motorcycles in virtually any country, or at least they could in the 70s and 80s. Now with emission standards, they'd have to make some modifications depending on the market. The strategy here is essentially to arbitrage. Arbitrage means buying your inputs in the cheapest market and selling them your outputs in the most expensive market. Get your labor. iPhones, right? iPhones are undifferentiated. Apple sells the same iPhone in every country, so they produce them all around the world wherever the inputs are the cheapest, and then sell them in countries where customers have enough money to buy iPhones. Costs and benefits. Advantages to globalization: you get great economies of scale, right? We can produce the same product and just sell it to even more customers without having to change it. We might decide to, maybe we're serving customers that operate globally. So if you are a bank, maybe you want to go and open a branch of your bank, follow one of your bank customers. If it's a big business that banks with Citibank and they expand into another country, maybe you want to open up a branch to serve that customer. Or if you're Sodexo and you have a customer that you provide catering to and they open up a branch internationally, but you follow them there. Other advantages, you can exploit arbitrage differences. Like I mentioned, you can buy your inputs, buy cheap labor in Taiwan to assemble iPhones, sell the iPhones in the USA and Europe where customers can afford them. You can gain learning advantages from being in different national markets. If you're opening up your own production facility in Taiwan, you can get better at doing that by learning from the other companies in that industry. Competing strategically, you can do cross-subsidization. What does that mean? Well, let's say that Walmart wanted to try and open up operations, open up Walmarts in China. Most probably they would be losing money initially, but you could subsidize your expansion into China based on your American sales. So you could subsidize operations with the cash flows from one country to the other country until it starts generating profit. At the other side, preferring national differentiation, where you really want to customize the product in the host market. Well, for one thing, there can be transportation and communication costs arising from geographic distance. What does that mean? Well, you might want to make foreign direct investment in order to have managers who are from the host market. If it's a very different management culture, let's say, again, you're opening up an operation in China, well, you might need to customize the way that you do management or that you operate as a firm to better align with the cultural values of Chinese work. If there's different needs or behavioral norms, let's say that there are regulatory differences. Europe has stricter regulations on what can go into food than America does. So if you wanted to sell food in Europe, you'd have to make some differentiation to meet those regulatory requirements. If you're going to open up a bank in England, you'd have to comply with banking regulations in Europe or England. And you can just have market and infrastructure differences from different levels of development. For example, lots of car companies will have budget cars that sell better in poorer countries and maybe less likely to sell their higher or larger vehicles. For example, Ford, to my knowledge, doesn't sell F-150 trucks in England. The infrastructure difference there is that the roads are very small and there's not a lot of large parking sizes. Instead, Ford in the past sold a very small vehicle called the Ka, Ka, that was targeted at the European market. So they differentiated it to fit those local needs. Here is a graph showing which industries tend to be more global, where you can just sell the same product in any market versus those where you need to tailor it. Obviously, funeral services are highly culturally, or there's a high element of cultural content in a funeral service. It's got a funeral in Louisiana. It's going to look different even than a funeral in Boston, than a funeral in certainly China or Germany. You would have to customize it. Jet engines, you're going to put the exact same jet engine in any plane that you're making around the world. So Rolls-Royce or whoever can just sell the same jet engine from one place and get global economies of scale that way. Lots of different examples here. I won't go into all of them, but they're worth looking at. Personal care products might be another one that's worth looking at. There tends to be more fashion or custom in personal care products. What kind of scents and fragrances do people like? What kind of toiletries do people use? That might very much depend and need to be tailored to different markets, even the way that they're advertised. This slide looks at different ways to structure a multinational corporation, and they are associated with different geographies at different points in time. 1900 to 1939, the prevailing structure was what's called the decentralized federation. Multinational companies a decentralized federation. What that means is that your subsidiaries had very high degrees of autonomy. They didn't have to go back to head office. If you were a British company with subsidiaries abroad, those companies weren't coming back to head office to ask a decision before they sold something or took an initiative. Why do you think that was? Well, communications at that time weren't very developed. If you needed to send a letter via, by a ship, you weren't going to be able to get a decision fast enough to actually operate effectively. 1945 to 1970, American MNCs as coordinated federation. Here there's still there's centralized control now, but still some autonomy in the subsidiaries. Communications have advanced a lot by this period, 1945. And so you did get strong headquarters control, but with limited autonomy in the subsidiaries, usually related to marketing, right? So that they could differentiate and distribute effectively in the host market. Japanese companies in the 1970s and 1980s operated as what's called centralized hubs, basically almost no autonomy in the subsidiaries. And this is still often the case, although less so with Japanese and Chinese firms. In Japan, especially, if you think about it, very small country with high population density, a culture that's more deferential to authority. And so this structure arose, this very highly authoritarian, centralized headquarters subsidiary style structure came out of that cultural and geographic context. The products they were making as well, tech products, Sony, Panasonic televisions, very limited amount of differentiation would have been needed for those products. They were global products anyways. Each of those is still in use today, and really which one is better depends on the type of product. If it's something that can be globalized, where it's just the same standardized product sold to a global market, a highly centralized structure would work well. If it needs large amounts of local differentiation, maybe a more federated structure or something looser works better. And then the amount of autonomy and authority granted to subsidiaries will be dependent on the culture of the home country, and maybe even the host country, but also the strategic considerations related to how much decision authority subsidiaries should have. This is sort of the new structure, which is the transnational corporation. As you can see here, it's very much a network. There's still a central coordinating headquarters in black there, but in this case, the subsidiaries have direct access to each other. Knowledge can flow freely. It doesn't all go back to a central hub and then out down the spokes to the subsidiaries. They can share information, they can share resources with each other. It implies a higher degree of autonomy, but it also means that knowledge is shared more quickly. If somebody makes a discovery at the Japanese subsidiary, I think it was Procter & Gamble's Japanese subsidiary that came up with the Swiffer, might be Unilever, but I think it was P&G. And they came up with the Swiffer in Japan, and that product, through a more networked approach, was fed back in and launched it in the other country subsidiaries. And you might have specialization in different subsidiaries. Maybe one subsidiary is particularly good with one type of product, another subsidiary is particularly good with another type of product, and they share best practice between the different nodes of the network. Last one here, I'm not going to get into Gamowatt's AAA triangle at all, so don't worry about it for this course. All right, I'll see you in the next lecture, which I'm going to release right away on that ties into this one on Dunning's OLI model and 4 motivations for foreign direct investment. So make sure you watch that one as well as this one.